Hello YouTube, this is Scott Grammer and I am the Old Audio Guy, and today we're going to try, again, this is take two for those who might be interested, to install this phono cartridge on this head shell and then install it on the turntable for you and show you the steps involved. And you'll probably get to laugh at me as I fumble finger some things because, well, I'm old and my hands don't work like they used to. Anyway, so we have here the hardware that came from Shure for this cartridge. You don't necessarily have to use the factory hardware. If it fits the head shell, it's a good idea. If it doesn't fit the head shell, you can get other hardware from Amazon and from other sources that will. So here's our cartridge and our head shell and a screwdriver. So the first thing we're going to do is to remove the stylus from the cartridge to protect it while we work. And on a Shure cartridge, it just pulls straight out like that. And we're just going to set it aside out of camera view here. And so the next thing is we want to fold the wires back on our head shell. We want to take one bolt or screw, however you wish to call it, put it through here. And we're going to pick up one of these nuts. And the best way to pick these up, and you can laugh at me if you want to, but this works, lick your finger and just go just like that. Works every time. And we'll see if we can introduce the nut to the screw and, well, almost. Let's try again. Got to relick the finger. Got to have some fresh spit on the finger or it doesn't work. By the way, of course, mine is certified audiophile grade spit. Don't try and use the regular spit. You won't like the results. So we've got the nut placed on the screw, and we'll take the phono cartridge and slide it onto that bolt, and then we will tighten this down just a little. I don't want it really tight. I just want it tight enough that it holds the cartridge in place more or less. So that's one less thing I have to manage while putting everything else together. We're going to take another bolt and put it through here. It's crooked, but it doesn't matter at this point. And we'll use a finger to hold that in place. And now this time, I think we're going to pick up this nut with some tweezers, which I believe I had off camera. And let's see if I can talk this into behaving itself. You know what might be easier is let's drop the bolt out and place the nut in the slot. You know, I like that better. Then we can hold the nut down and put the screw on the end of the screwdriver. Finger management, remember, that's what I told you, finger management. And voila. The cartridge, she is more or less mounted to the head shell. Now it's still loose at this time. And again, that's actually what we want because we have to be able to adjust the overhang later, and overhang is the distance between the stylus and the pivot of the tone arm. And this nut, or this screw, seems to be sticking a little bit in this groove. There we go. Now, so you adjust the overhang using a method I'll show you later, by moving the cartridge forwards or backwards in the head shell. So it's okay that it's a little bit loose. So now we have to hook up our wires, and our wires are a standard color code, red, green, blue, and white. And as you can see, we also have those same colors on the phono cartridge, red, green, blue, and white. So it's a simple matter of matching the colors, and start with the ones closest to the head shell. Connect green to green. They just slide up. And then white to white. Did I mention finger management? It's weird being the same age as old people, and your fingers don't work like they used to. And then we'll go red to red. and finally blue to blue. So we are electrically wired, but as you can see, our wires are hanging off to the side, and we don't want that. So we're just going to kind of tuck them under here so that they don't hang down. We don't want them hanging down past the bottom of the cartridge here, and we don't want them to hang out on either side. So that is good enough. That's all it takes. There is no need to braid them. In fact, I would advise against braiding them, because that can have some deleterious effects, both in terms of physical longevity and in terms of electrical issues. It can cause a loss of separation in the high frequencies and can also cause other problems. So at this point, we have to do a little movie magic, a little video editing, and we'll come back in a minute with the turntable. One moment, please. Sorry about that, Big Clive. Just had to do it. And we're back, and what you see here is my Audio-Technica AT-LP120X USB too damn long of a model number turntable. It used to be that a model number would be like, this is the number 7 turntable. But they can't do that anymore. They have to have at least 12 letters, or it's just not real. So, anyway, it has a standard S-shaped tone arm. And this kind of tone arm with this connector is referred to as an SME tone arm, after the Shure tone arm from many years ago that devised this shape and this connector. So we will take our cartridge, which still has the stylus removed from it, and we're just going to plug it right in like that and tighten it down. And as you can see, we can still move the cartridge back and forth. And at this point, we're going to reinstall the stylus, which I have over here now. And we're just going to plug that right straight in and souse it home like that. And we have to lift up the dynamic damper and clip it up out of the way. So what we're going to do now, first we'll unclip the tone arm and we will just rough balance it. We're not going to get it perfect because it doesn't matter right now if it's perfect. We just want it to be sort of balanced. And we'll set this, which is the stylus force indicator, we'll set that to 0 and bring it up to about 1 gram, which is enough for what we're about to do. We're not going to play a record yet. We have adjustments to make. This is an overhang protractor, and it has two sides. This side says Stevenson. This side says Bearwald. Now, Stevenson and Bearwald are two different alignments for a phono cartridge, and Bearwald is kind of the standard. It optimizes the overhang, or the distance between the stylus and the pivot, so that the tone arm tracks correctly in the middle of the record. And that's what most people set their tone arms up to do. I don't. I use the Stevenson side. And the difference is the Stevenson side moves the ideal tracking towards the inside of the record. And the reason I do that is that I'm sure you've noticed when you've played a record before that the inner tracks, the last track on a side, always has more distortion than the outer tracks. And this is because the grooves are not moving as fast. In other words, the linear velocity of the groove is slower, so it's packing more information into a small space. And so that raises the distortion. And it's more important that your tracking be perfect in there than it is in the middle or the outside edge of the record. So I use the Stevenson protractor. So we just hang that over the center post of the platter. And we're going to make sure the turntable's off when you do this. We're going to lower the stylus down so that it lands on this first center point here. See this little center point right here? And you may have to, especially on a direct drive turntable, you may have to hold the platter. And what you want to see is, when it's on that dot, is the front edge of the stylus parallel to these lines that lead to the center of the platter? In this case, it is not. It's not far off, but it's not quite there. So if I pull the cartridge, first of all, I have to get it even. So that makes it more or less straight there. And let's try this again. And I can see that the cartridge needs to go back and this way. The reason it needs to go back is the only way this is going to be parallel is if this moves back here. To do that, we have to move the cartridge back. And in fact, it is very common when using a Stevenson alignment for the tone arm to have to be, or rather for the cartridge to have to be way back towards the back of the head shell. So that's where we're going to place it, is way back towards the back. And we're going to try again. And we're going to set the stylus down on that point. And now when I look down the front edge of the cartridge, it looks to be parallel. Now we have to do that again here. Place it there. And when I look down the front edge of the cartridge, it appears to be perfectly parallel. So that is just right. So now what we have to do is we have to tighten these without significantly moving the cartridge. And that can be a little bit of a bear. As you see, it wants to move. So we're going to do the best we can to get that one tight. And then get this one in about the same position. And tighten it. And then we're going to recheck. We'll check this one first. That looks pretty good. We'll check this one. That looks pretty good too. So our overhang is set. Now, once the overhang is set, the next thing is we're going to rebalance the tone arm. This time we're going to be careful about it. The reason we didn't worry too much about the balance the first time is that moving the cartridge changes the balance of the tone arm. So there's no need to be too precise about it while you're setting the overhang. But now it's time to do it for real. So what we're going to do, we make sure that the anti-skating is turned off, and we start to rotate the entire counterweight until the tone arm rises. And we want to have the tone arm float horizontally. It's moving that way because my anti-skating still has a little bit of force. It really shouldn't at this point, but it does. And our tone arm is floating a little too high, so we're going to add a little more tracking force, or a little more weight to the front. Get it as close as we can. Not quite. There it is. There it is. So now we'll set the indicator to 0. And for right now, we'll clamp the tone arm down. Now, the instructions for this cartridge, which we will open up and take a look at, state that with the dynamic stabilizer down engaged, the optimum tracking force is 1.75 grams. And since I will be running the dynamic stabilizer, that's what we're going to set it to. The stylus actually only gets 1.25 grams of that force applied to it. The other half gram is going to the dynamic stabilizer. So we're going to flip the dynamic stabilizer down into operating position. And we're going to set this to read 1.75. Now, if you do not have this next tool, which is a stylus force gauge, which I'll show you here, then it's good enough just to set the counterweight to read whatever stylus force you want it to read. That's going to be just fine for most turntables. But if you have a stylus force gauge, let's use it because you can be much more accurate. Oh, that wasn't good. And we'll set that down on it. 1.82 should be 1.75. So let's back this off a little. Try again. 1.71, we're almost there. 1.74, 1.75. You know what? I'll take that. It's flicking back and forth between 4 and 5. I'll take that. So now we're going to take away the stylus force gauge, turn it off, put it away. Sorry you're hearing my neighbors outside who seemingly have just one volume, and that's yell. So anyway, for right now we're going to set the anti-skating to 1.75. However, this isn't really right. It's close, it will be in the ballpark, but it's not quite right. And the reason it's not quite right is the dynamic damper is going to throw the anti-skating off a little bit. Normally it will cause you to have less anti-skating because it will tend to reduce the pull exerted on the stylus by the skating force. So instead I'm going to set it to a little above 1 and see if that's not about right. There is a better way to do that, a better way to set anti-skating. It is not what you may have seen in other YouTube videos. I have seen YouTube videos where they take a blank record, a record with no grooves, or an acrylic platter mat, and they'll set the stylus on it, set the platter in motion, and then adjust the anti-skating so that it doesn't move, and they think that's going to be right, but it's not. Here's the reason why that's not right. The skating force is caused by the friction of the stylus in the groove of the record. Well, when there's no groove, plainly the friction is going to be different because only the very tip of the stylus is touching the platter or touching the whatever you're testing with, the acrylic mat or grooveless record or whatever, and there's going to be way less friction and therefore way less skating force than when the stylus is actually seated in the groove of a record. So no, that won't get it. The correct way to do it is to use a distortion analyzer, measuring the distortion produced by a test tone record that has, say, a 1 kilohertz or a 400 hertz sine wave recorded on it, and you adjust your anti-skating so that the distortion is the same on both channels. I do have the ability to do that. I can do that for you if you bring your turntable to Red Bank Vintage Audio. However, I'm at home and I don't have that here, so I will not be demonstrating that on this video. But that's the way to do it, is you measure the distortion of both channels at the same time and you adjust your anti-skating until the distortion is the same in both channels. Then your anti-skating is set correctly. So let's do another magical movie edit and we'll see what this turntable sounds like.